name is Valerie Lannon. I'm with the Toronto West Branch of International Socialists, and we want to begin by acknowledging the traditional territory on which this building is located and in which we're having our meeting. It's been occupied for about 15,000 years. It's the territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Petun First Nations, also the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory is a subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. Tina Stevens is one of our speakers, but she's also going to open our meeting in a good way. So I'll ask Tina to.
Mimits, Nidijnakas, Kitiganziwi, Ndibikag, a Mongol and Dodo. My English name is Tina Stevens, and my name that I was given by the grandmother is Little Pigeon, and my home territory is Kitiganziwi, and that's in the Algonquin Nation, about 2 hours north of Ottawa. And as well, my clan is the Loon, and so we're noted for kind of being flighty, but at the same point, being peace, and as well as being able to be the go-between in regards to the leaders and the people that are following. We're the mid people. And so I found myself in that range. For this morning, afternoon now, I'd like just to bring an opening in our language as with truth and reconciliation, and as well as with respect to keeping and trying to revitalize our language and our ceremonies. It's our role and responsibility to keep them alive. So it's miigwech jemado gin kinegagol gajitoyen, miigwech jemado giziskiwasiya ajayen, miigwech skepkimikweg gimijian bemazuin gimijian mijam, gimijian abish gimijian wasiniag, minwa gimijian neswin. Sama ngabag na jaba, wabanang javanang. Epingashma minwa duelanam. Nana moshin shi gashgabioyan minwa shikon shinzong igad within miigwechan mado. I have a French version of that as well, but my R's aren't quite what they're supposed to be when I try the French translation. But the English language is thank you, Creator, for all that you have created. Thank you, Grandfather Sun, for shining on us today. Thank you, Grandmother Moon, for shining on us at night. Thank you, Mother Earth, for giving us life, for giving us food, for giving us the water, for giving us the animals, and for the air that we breathe. I have offered tobacco to the east when I woke up this morning, to the north, the south, and the west. Help me to stand strong and to have a strong heart. Thank you, Creator. I was very humbled at the invite to be able to stand and speak and to be able to walk a bit of the journey with you today as we talk about the most obviously defining period of time in regards to the struggles with climate justice. Indigenous people, as Jesse had said in his opening statements, are the front line, and that there is a lot to deal with in regards to how we deal with climate justice and our struggles because of the colonization that has occurred on Turtle Island, and it being able to protect Mother Earth and all that she gives us and all that she allows us to be able to be nurtured. But a lot of that is going to waste, and the worry is today, from my own point of view, is that when I grew up, my elders, my grandmothers and grandfathers taught me that my sole role and responsibility was to be able to plant the seeds and to keep growing those seeds, to be able to make sure that Mother Earth would be around for the next 7 generations to come. Now that's a simple statement to make, but like the cliche that people use today, you have to not only talk the talk, but walk the walk. And that is getting harder in those challenging situations because of the fact that not only are you dealing with, the GMO food that we're now eating and ingesting, those chemicals that alter our lives and alter the inners that we're growing up in, as well with respect to the meats and those plants that we so heavily rely on, that we're supposed to nurture as Indigenous people in our roles and responsibilities. The animals have their cycle to be able to live within. The plants, the herbs, and the air that we breathe as well all have their own purposes in regards to the way that this earth is able to evolve. That ability is starting to shrink. When I wake up in the mornings, I look at the blue sky. The tints of that blue sky are changing. Our ancestors and those people that have the wisdom in the Arctic see those winds coming in and notice the change. They experience that change in that ozone layer that's there to protect Mother Earth as well. The sun is going to start affecting us and impacting our lives. So when you get up in that morning, you take that first breath of life and you open your eyes. You can imagine if at one day you can't take that next breath. Or when you're in the morning and you go off to Timmy's and Starbucks. Are you going to have the water to be able to make that coffee, to give you that energy? Are you able to give that water and mix it with the breast milk? Are you able to have that water to be able to mix with the children's foods? There are so many challenges that we're facing if that water is not around. As women, we are on those front lines. You can see us in North Dakota. You can see us in Aamjiwnaang. You can see us in Grassy Narrows. You can see us, we're the first there on the lines as grandmothers and elders. That's because we take our own personal role and responsibility that seriously. We get in the way of those bulldozers. We get in the way of those clear cutters. We get in the way of those people that want to take more in terms of an abundance of fish in those fisheries. We take our roles and responsibilities the way that our elders taught us. To Indigenous peoples, land is not just physical and a biological environment. The land is the ashes of our ancestors who fought to keep the land from becoming destroyed by others. The ancestors on whose shoulders we stand in this generation, land we must preserve for the next 7 generations. So again, I have to acknowledge the lands that I stand on. I have to acknowledge the defenders that have come before me in terms of the Haudenosaunee and all the territories that were given our welcome this morning. They're strong defenders of these lands, and they have been for thousands of years. The teachings of our people concerning our relationships to the land are deeply embedded as well in our language. For instance, in Ojibwe, Anishinaabe Akin means the land to which the people belong. It means that we belong to the land. It wasn't ours, it's never been ours. We are the leasees or the leaseors, and we're responsible for taking care of that land. This concept is accompanied by many of the teachings, and one of which is our relationship to the land is just that. It's purely a relationship. Again, we're not owners of the land. We don't own it. So when we have the settlers come in, and they come in terms of starting to build those colonies, they have different perspectives. And at that time of our meeting, we wanted to travel together just as explained in the teachings of the two-row wampum in the Niagara Treaty. When you look at these treaties that exist in a lot of different territories and reserves all across the nation, they're there for a particular reason, because that's our only, again, another defense that we have to protect our lands and our resources. Without those treaties, without those laws, in terms of the Aboriginal law that's been obviously acknowledged within the Canadian Charter of Freedom and as well as the British North American Act previously, those are the things that are so vital now. Those treaties are vital now. Those are the only laws that are protecting our defenders to be able to protect those lands and resources that we feed from, that we nurture from. The other thing is going into, even though it may be a completely abstract idea, but when you look at the missing and murdered Aboriginal women, when you look at the trafficking of women, when you look at the violence against women, this is the vision that our elders saw, and it was a demonstration of how much lack of respect that the settlers have had across the nation, and that they're pillaging our lands, they're stripping our lands, they're violating our lands and taking from us something that they don't own and something that they shouldn't have their hands on in the first place. But they use it to their advantage. They use it for their capitalism. They use it for the austerity tactics that are now being in existence in Canada. Then you go to the next level, and the people don't know, and they don't see those international trade agreements. Those too are having an impact, again, affecting, impacting, attacking the lands and resources that Indigenous people live on. Again, Canada's trying to give our rights away, trying to, not hold any responsibility, because of the fact that they too want control over our lands and resources, because they know how valuable they are. They know exactly how that feeds into what we're experiencing now. Without those grasslands, without those trees that take in the oxygen and the carbon dioxide, without those, they know that we know that Mother Earth doesn't have the ability to survive. Those trees plant their roots, and when they go down and they make that thud, again, you can feel it. It's like a drum that's beating and that's resonating, because you know that another piece of Mother Earth is dying. When you look at those investment and trade deals and international trade agreements, they're heavily impacting on climate and the struggles we have with it. Because not only do they allow more pollution to be created, but they as well allow the pollution to expand. So while I'm breathing in the air today in Toronto, and I know that Toronto is a very, very highly polluted municipality and metropolis, but that's expanding. We now see it in Hamilton. We now have the extreme heated weather and the industrialization carrying forward to London. London is now coming from the other way, from Detroit and Windsor. So it's meeting full blast, and we are experiencing more of those extreme weathers and extreme storms that are coming into place. But there are the think tanks of this Canadian government, the think tanks of those international trade agreements that absolutely deny that there's anything going on in terms of climate change, that global warming doesn't exist. And they keep feeding that message to everybody around me in my community. So when I sit down to have these chats, these talks, these teachings about climate change, they say, you know, we're not there yet. Everything's okay. And I look at my water. I know London specifically, in terms of our sewage plants. They have to feed a lot more acid to be able to clean those sewage plants, to clean the water. But we also have an aging infrastructure in London. And so our pipes, our copper pipes, our lead pipes, are also having to increase the levels of alkaline that are added to those pipes to keep that water clean. But eventually, something's gonna bust. It's like the pipelines carrying the crude oil and the bitumen. Something's gotta bust there. And we'll have more water boil advisories in the larger metropolises and the municipalities. Those boil water advisories that are existing in 46% of our Indigenous communities are a direct result of that lack of respect, that lack of humility, those lacking of wisdom, those lacking in of our 7 grandfather teachings that people don't respect anymore. But our children are starting to wake up. Our younger generation. I listened to Jesse and I said, you go first today, Jesse, because I want to hear what's going on in the generations to come. Those young generations have a lot of power. They see the struggle. They're being educated. And what more has to be done is to be able to put that education into the books. Environmental racism, cultural genocide, they won't speak it in the open media. They just won't, they censor it to high levels. But we look at the migrant workers, and during the march this morning, and they share with me in regards to the squalor conditions that they have to live in for trying to nurture our land, to be able to provide that food to so many markets, to so many stores that people consume. In that consuming phase, that wanting more, the me generation in a sense, there is the notion that you have to love yourself in our teachings, but not loving yourself to the point of selfishness. Because the fact that eventually you have to give, and a lot more people are taking. And so then that's the environmental racism, because not only do they take from everybody else in the community, but they see and they view, in terms of the First Peoples across this land, as being, foolish, as people not being taken care of. It's sort of like they look at in terms of, if they would just move from the territories that they're living in terms of their conditions. Well, I'm sorry, we didn't have a choice. We didn't have a choice to be where our reserves and territories are. We got placed there because of the Indian Act. And so when we started being scoped and focused into these small areas all the way across Canada, it really disrupted in regards to the way that we lived, the way that we hunted, the way that we fished. All of that then becomes, and it creates that dependency on other things because our animals are slowly disappearing. There's a lot more extinction going on. And then as well, you look at companies such as Nestle, who are being given outright and outlandish rights to be able to take that water. And not only is it not being taken from the distinguished and the lavish communities, they are fracking and they're taking the water from the most vulnerable communities first. And that's similar to all around the world. They bleed that water from those countries. And then what do? They sell it back to them so that they can survive. I comment on my own home reserve in Kittiganzibi. For the last 10 years, as well, like many of the other communities, they've been on a boil water advisory. For the last 10 years, they've never seen natural water come from the wells. Every Thursday morning, 3 huge bottles of water from Nestle get dropped off, right? And so we live with that, and you can't even necessarily take a shower because you can't wash off the water that you're not supposed to be touching. And you look at the missing and murdered and Indigenous women, you look at the 60 scoops, the amount of infringement that's going on to your first person who carries that water of life, it's the women. And now there's even more toxins in the air and more toxins in the water that you look at the Akwesasne Reserve, you look at the Arctic, and the mothers don't want to breastfeed their children anymore for fear of being able to pass on those toxins. You look at Kashuashuan and Fort Chipewyan and the birth defects that those children go through in regards to either having their fingers or their toes fused together, or they don't even have the fingers, they're stubs. Or they don't have, in terms of, they have more like duck feet. Then you go to Amgenong, and depending on which way that air is blowing, coming from those refineries, there was a study done, and of course, we had to do the study ourselves. And so they showed huge pictures in regards to the male and the female body. They showed in terms of where the concentrations of cancer were from everybody in that community. There was 83% that have cancer in that First Nation because of the fact that they can't move. They could take Blue Water though. Blue Water was a community that once existed there, and it was of non-Indigenous people. And things started to go wrong. People started to get sick. They moved that whole township. They didn't have to stay. But Amgenong, Sarnia First Nation, didn't have that choice. And so every year they have that toxic tour. Every year they try and educate people around what's happening to their bodies, what's happening to their hearts, what's happening to their spirits. There is the teachings on the different generations. And the 6th generation, which is the one that I'm living in, is the one that has the full responsibility of passing on the knowledge and truly forcing the knowledge on our children, that they have to do something about it. And that's why our younger generation is starting to make that push. As you had commented on, there was huge amounts of people out here for that rally for the jobs and justice last year. Everybody, and the Indigenous people, again, they were respected, they led the way. Just as they have for many years. For thousands of years, they've led the way. They knew how to acclimatize. They knew how to feed off the land properly because they had respect for it. They had the wisdom of knowing what herbs and which plants and which animals would carry them, either nurturing them food or to be able to heal them from sicknesses. They didn't have that ability after the settlers came. And so that spirit, that accountability, those roles and responsibilities have eroded. It's not that we have forgotten them, but it's harder and harder with the oppression that we've received from the Canadian government and other governments. So when I stand before you in terms of, are there struggles by the Indigenous people across this land when it comes to climate justice? Absolutely. We do try and do our part. And it's hard to watch people giving up in my communities because they don't know what else to do, because of the fact that they have no voice. And that's what allows the trampling of our communities by this Canadian government because they know that our voices are becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. So for me, climate justice is the tip. That's one issue, and that's the focus of today. But there are many issues that Indigenous people struggle with on a daily basis and will continue. But leaving you with that positive note, we're still here. We still haven't been eradicated. They still haven't made us disappear. We're still on the front lines as those strong women. We're still there taking on those roles and responsibilities, just as we did over 1,000 years ago. So when we look at the fracking, when we look at Bill C-51, that paint us in such a black picture just because we're defenders, and now we're becoming terrorists. It's ironic that, like what was said in a commentary about North Dakota and the pipeline that's carrying and what people are protesting down there, the original peoples of the land are now being charged with trespassing on that original land that they owned. So, to put it bluntly, I'm going to continue taking that role and responsibility. I'm going to look for those petitions against Nestle to make sure that they don't have to pay just $15 a day to outbid another company so they can take even more water from the Guelph area. I'm going to keep looking for marches. I'm going to keep looking for demonstrations. I'm going to keep looking and going down to Amgenong for the toxic tour. If called to a rally or a protest in regards to anything to deal with the climate, you will find me and continue to find me there. Because this earth, Mother Earth grew me. It's helped to nurture me. It's helped to nurture this heart, and it's helped to nurture everything that I have inside. So I will continue to fight against anything that allows me to get even more diseased or to get even more sick. The horrendous nature in regards to the increase in the amount of ailments, the mental health, the toxins inside, what we eat, what we're taking in that we don't even realize, has skyrocketed. But if I myself don't educate myself by knowing what those animals eat or what they're drinking or what I'm drinking and ingesting, then I'm sticking my head in the sand and ignoring the reality of Canada and the community that I live in. So while I can't be responsible for the whole nation, I can be responsible for what I can live and breathe and touch and taste and watch.